Okay, good evening everybody. On this nice warm evening. Gentlemen, please take your jackets off. Gentlemen, if you wish. Thank you very much. Welcome to the Communities Housing Environment Committee meeting on the 16th of July 2019. I have been advised that there are no fire drills planned this evening, but if the alarm sounds, Mrs Matthews will assess the situation and provide further instructions on the evacuation of the building if necessary. I will remind you that this meeting will be broadcast live and recorded for playback on the Maidstone Borough Council website. But if anyone else is recording or filming the proceedings, please let us know now. Note, we do that to know people that this is actually happening in the room. I will remind you that members who are using mobile phones or tablets are please asked to ensure that they are on silent and only used for business this evening. Thank you. Okay, so we go into agenda item 1. Apologies for absence, please.
We have no apologies.
We have none at all. Thank you. So we have no substitute members. We don't have any urgent items. We don't have any visiting members. Disclosure by members or officers? No. Lovely. Disclosures of lobbying? No. I've mentioned that I was lobbied once upon a time on the taxi item, but not recently on these particular papers. We don't have any exempt items, so the whole meeting will be taken in public. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. So over to the minutes of the last meeting, please, which are on page 1. And I'll take them page by page. So it's page 1, page 2, thank you, page 3. On page 3, if I could just mention it here, the low emissions study, I don't know whether you're aware, but the study was actually done and the report went to the SPI committee last Wednesday evening, and members there decided that they would, out of the 3 options, that they would go with the red route through Upper Stone Street, and that was decided at the time, and that will now progress within this council and obviously KCC as the highway authority. So that's something that we did on this committee, that we've achieved something, if I can put it like that, and now we're actually moving forward with it. So page 4.
I wasn't at that last meeting, but on page 4, where it's under Maidstone Cemetery, it's got about reports being produced for the Policy and Resource Committee. I'm assuming that that's also going to come to us, is it? Or is Maidstone Cemetery not with us anymore? I do get a bit confused.
It's just for the additional funding.
Right, it's just for the additional funding. Funding, yeah. Right. Okay, page 5. And 6. And page 7, 8, 9, and of course 10. Is that all agreed? Yep, lovely, thank you very much. Now we go to the community work programme, please. I've missed something out. Sorry? Sorry, beg your pardon. We have no petitions this evening. We have no questions and answers from members of the public. And now we move on to the committee work programme, please, from Mrs Matthews. Had you already contacted an officer?
We have received the question, but it's actually going to be before our Policy and Resources Committee, which is on the 23rd of July. Okay.
All right. Sorry about that. Your wasted journey. I do apologise. Okay, so we'll move on to back to the community work programme, please.
Okay. The only thing to make members aware of is the Crime and Disorder Committee will be happening on the 24th of September, which I believe is a week after our normal committee meeting.
Any questions from anybody? Councillor Pearl, you were first.
I think our absconding questioner has actually got to the heart of a matter I was going to raise, really. The committee work programme looks a tad light, and it seems that if it wasn't for Councillor Harwood, we'd have nothing to do in October. And then looking at today's agenda, other than the formalities of declaring interests and looking at committee work programmes, the only item we appear to have is something that was looked at by the licensing committee last week. There's nothing on, say, climate change and so on and so forth. Yet, next week, the Policy and Resources Committee, which is already stuffed full of work, is going to be discussing that. Surely the remit of this committee is to take the lead on the Council's environmental brief. Why are we being circumvented so that, bless him, with respect, Councillor Harper can arrange for sort of his working group and so on and so forth to be set up and so on, dare I say, one group of leftists co-opting another group of leftists. Why isn't this sort of those matters being discussed in this committee?
I'll let Mr. Littlemore come in. I know a few bits and pieces as well, but...
From time to time when this issue has come up, we've had to refer back to the Constitution to find out where the responsibilities for these matters lie. And policy development lies with either the Planning and Infrastructure Committee or Policy and Resources. This committee is responsible for monitoring the delivery of action plans.
Yes, obviously we, as a council, we declared our emergency and we committed ourselves to becoming carbon neutral by 2030. I would have thought that that is the strategic objective, and the implementation of how we achieve carbon neutrality by 2030 and so on and so forth is a matter for this committee, not a matter for policy and resources. The word environment doesn't appear once in the terms of references of the Policy and Resources Committee, yet section 223 of our constitution is clear that this committee takes the lead in delivering such objectives as carbon neutrality and so on and so forth.
I hear your comments. I will refer back to the relevant head of service tomorrow and make those comments available to her. But that was a decision that was looked at by a number of people, including our monitoring officer, and that was the advice that we were given.
Yeah, I mean, I chase things in my capacity as chair occasionally as well, and I'm aware that some of the reports at the moment, we've been waiting on external people to give us their information to get those reports together. We will be getting the biodiversity report eventually, if I could put it like that. That is, I'm keeping an eye on that, and as you say, the climate change and biodiversity. In fact, I've been talking to some members about that on PNR regarding involving this committee at a later date, because we can't get, as Mr. Littlemore says, we can't get to that at the moment. So, Councillor Joy.
I wasn't going to speak on this, but I've got to say I do sort of agree with what Councillor Pell's saying, which doesn't happen very often. But the reason I am just going to say that is it not my understanding that if there is something that the committee wish to put on the work programme, at any time we can. So perhaps we need to have one of these little group get-togethers and decide for ourselves what we would like. There's no reason why that shouldn't happen. But the reason I asked to speak was about the meeting of the Crime and Disorder. I have said it elsewhere. Just to say my disappointment that a date has just been given to us out of the blue for the 24th of September, when even if it had been 2 dates for us to consider and get back, I would have been more happy. But just to give us the 24th of September, for something as important as that, which we are here to discuss, I am very disappointed. Perhaps that could be thought about next time.
Certainly. I was aware that it was going to, I was asked about the 24th. I questioned it why it was going to be then, and because the way the committees are working and there are various things going on at the time, that was the only available day we could fit it in, if I could put it like that, at the time. So, yeah. Okay. Now then, Councillor Mrs. Rose.
I apologise if I shouldn't answer this question now, being new, I'm not sure. But local nature reserve on September, in September, I am passionately interested in Fant Wildlife Group in the park. Is it in order if I liaise with the lead, Rob Jarman, and the report author? Is that allowable, that I can?
Apologies, Councillor. As I'm not aware of what's going to be contained in the report, it's difficult to give you an answer tonight. So can we go away and have perhaps a conversation outside of the committee and just clarify? Because we wouldn't want you to be in a position where you couldn't then partake in the discussion at the relevant meeting.
It's just that it's really important within Fant to feel that we have a voice in being able to think about the wildlife park. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. Anybody else on the work programme at all? No, I do know, I think, Mr. Littlemore, that we've got the homelessness strategy coming as well later on in the year.
Yes, that will be coming back to you in September as well. So yes, as Councillor Bell rightly said, it's going to be a busy agenda then.
Lovely. Okay, thank you, members. That's so. Is that the work programme is agreed at this moment in time? Thank you. Okay, we're going to item 12, the outside body report, on pages 13 to 22. Mrs. Matthews is going to present this, please.
Okay. Good evening, members. This report and the table attached to Appendix 1 summarises the outside bodies that fall under the remit of this committee. All vacancies have recently been advertised to councillors and the following nominations have been received. Councillor Denise Joy for Cutbush and Coral, Councillor Bob Hinder for Vinters Valley Park Trust. The committee are asked to consider these nominations and make an appointment if appropriate. There are a number of outstanding vacancies, one vacancy each for Action with Communities in Royal Kent, Age UK, Citizens Advice Bureau, Cutbush and Coral, and finally one for Relate Western Mid Kent. The committee could decide to identify a course of action to fill these vacancies. For example, it could choose to nominate a member of this committee, or it could choose to re-advertise the vacancies to all councillors again. So that's it, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or perhaps ideas from members at all about this? No. Councillor Rose?
Hiya. Yeah, I think, because this has been going around for a little while now, hasn't it? I guess, I think, unless any of us are really chomping at the bit at it tonight, I think it might be prudent to re-advertise it to the wider membership, wider amount of councillors, and see if we get anything back. That's my view.
Thank you. Councillor Burton.
Thank you, Chairman. Could I make another suggestion that we invite, if we haven't already, the agencies who are seeking a nomination from this council to perhaps attend this committee and speak as well, because I believe Cutbush and Coral spoke incredibly well when they sent a representative along to our last committee, and Councillor Mrs Joy may have already been minded to put herself forward at that point, but if she wasn't beforehand, I'm sure that would have absolutely convinced her. Perhaps we could see the same from the other bodies.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And we had the rural Councillor Round came with his talk about his rural coffee bus, but yeah.
If I may, Chairman, I do wonder, whilst we do tenuously, as already discussed, hold an environment brief for this committee, just looking around the room, there aren't a great wealth of rural area representatives in this room. And I do wonder whether, as a result of that, we ought to be making our plea, perhaps through you as chairman, to other committees where there are more rural members. It would seem slightly nonsensical for either of the representatives of Parkwood to sit on this rural board.
Yeah, well spotted, but yes, I totally agree with you. One thought that I'll put out there, and we don't want any decisions on it tonight. When I was considering this, and as you know, I've been a councillor a number of years now, outside bodies has always been a problem filling, and it's sort of a historical, institutional thing that the council does. And perhaps it would be good, if I can say this, if some did fall by the wayside over the coming years, so we can actually concentrate, if I can say, on the important ones, but some of the ones would say, well, we're just as important as others. I did think that perhaps next year, when we have a new council or whatever, that we could possibly, a chair or vice chair could actually automatically take a place, for example, on the Citizens Advice Bureau. So it would automatically. So when the chair gets voted in, he would automatically go on to that which is one of the main top outside bodies. Vice chair. I mean, you have a think about it, but basically, I'm just putting it out there as an idea that we've got these vacancies, and possibly you could fill 3 or 4. You could always say no, of course, but it's always there as the option. And this chair here goes to the health and scrutiny automatically on KCC. So. Councillor Rose?
Yeah, I mean, I've been on this committee for over a year now, and maybe I should know perhaps, but what is it that's really expected of us as if we take up these vacancies? What's sort of involved? I mean, do you have an awareness, or is there anyone who could let me know?
Sometimes it's quite good to have some sort of experience in that particular area. They all vary in terms of how often they meet, so that's probably something to take into account. Some are quarterly, some are monthly, some are like even annually. So normally they would, when we advertise these, we advertise them with the job spec. So if you read the job spec and you feel that you reach that sort of criteria, then by all means apply for them. But that's. So some are more hard work than others, obviously. So,
yeah. Do you think it would be possible to if you're going to re-put it out there anyway, to circulate that job spec again, just so we can get a bit of a... But just for all of them, I mean, I think for us, it's just about, what we physically have time for, and I think all of us are conscious of not biting off more than we can chew, but, if there's someone that needs a certain amount of time that we think we can do, then that's all we really need to know, I guess.
Yeah, I quite agree with that. And I know that some of the outside bodies, perhaps they meet only 3 times a year, and other ones they meet once a month or something like that. So it's the commitment of time as well. So you don't. Just before I go after Councillor Joy, I went on the outside bodies for the YMCA Maidstone when I was elected. That was the first thing I did. I've been on there ever since because I've enjoyed it, and it's because the organisation has got bigger and bigger and grown, and we've had to make some very important decisions about spending money, you know what I mean? And that's taken some time, and and then when you achieve that goal, you want to go for the next bit, like having a business, but basically you get to a certain stage and you'd like to progress a bit further. So, Councillor Joy.
Thank you. I've been on different outside bodies for a long time. One of the things that I think is quite difficult for them as an organisation is we have these spaces. So on Cutbush and Coral, I think there's 3 vacancies for 3 members. Now, occasionally, as a board, it wouldn't matter. I'm going to use Cutbush, but I shouldn't really. But say we haven't got 3 members that have come forward and we've got 2. There are occasions when we could very easily go outside and use that place for somebody else, say, that's very good in finance or very good. I think sometimes it's a little bit restrictive, I think, for the outside bodies. I don't know how clear it is that even though they've got it's got a member vacancy, that if there's someone else that comes up that can fill it, I blame the councillors, because years ago they would fight to be on an outside body, and now I know everybody's busy and everything else, but it's the only way you get to be in the community and work with them. So I just think it's got to be made clearer that if a member isn't filling it, there is still that opportunity for them to engage with someone else that is willing to take that up. Thank you.
Councillor Burton.
Whilst I don't want to disagree with the sentiment of what Councillor Mrs Joy is saying, I would actually flip that on its head and speak about the experience of a committee that I do sit on outside of this council, which is an organisation, a charitable organisation that works largely in the Parkwood ward. They do provisionally, although not officially in their constitution as an organisation, hold a place for a representative for the area from both of the local councils, but they don't include themselves within this regime of outside body representation, precisely so that they don't hold those positions up if nobody takes up those positions. So whilst I do understand the sentiment of what you're saying about, it's a shame that councillors aren't leaping at the opportunity for these positions, I do also think it's maybe an opportunity for the organisations to look again and say, well, actually, we could still maintain contact with our councillors and offer them the opportunity outside of this system, and not use that as a reason not to get somebody with financial expertise, etc., on board.
Yep. Thank you for that. That's very good. Okay. So we've got the recommendations on page 13, members. The current council representatives be noted. The committee consider the nominations received for the positions of Cutbush and Coral and the Vinters Valley Park Trust, and makes an appointment if appropriate. And the committee identifies a suitable course of action to fill any outside vacancies. Is that agreed? Oh, Councillor.
If I may, Chairman, unless I'm sort of misreading or misinterpreting what's on our papers, I think you probably actually need some recommendations from us for those. So with regard to point 2 of our recommendations, you actually presumably need somebody to say, I recommend the nominations for approval. And also, I believe you probably need a suggested motion for the suitable course of action. So from having heard bits of this conversation, I know I've suggested one course for inviting people to. So yeah, so that's what I'm suggesting. Thank you. It would be useful to take those actually as motions so we know what we're voting for.
Right, so we're okay on 1 then? Yeah. Recommend. Yep, agreed. Okay, lovely. 2, do you want to?
So Councillor Denise Joy for Cutbush and Coral. So we need to vote 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, we're right. We've got 7. Councillor Bob Hinder for Vinters Valley Park Trust.
4. Lovely. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you.
And then 3, committee identifies a suitable course of action to fill the outstanding vacancies.
Okay, so the first one
So
we've got is that the committee invites agencies seeking nominations to give a presentation to the committee. 4. Unanimous. Okay. That's that one. Just part of the re-advertising, isn't it, really? So, yeah.
I've made
okay.
a note of that and I'll...
Yeah. Okay. The other one was recommendation that the chair or vice chair is automatically appointed to the CAB, so from this committee. 4.
I think possibly that might need to go to Democracy Committee first. I'm not sure. I mean, I was putting it out there as a thought, but
Well, we would need to recommend that.
we would need to recommend that to the appropriate committee. So Sorry, I put me out in front. What I'm saying is when a chair and vice chair is voted on one of the service committees at the beginning of the municipal year, they would automatically go on one of the 4, if I can put it like, or 8 outside bodies, if I can put it like that, yeah? So you'd automatically fall onto that committee. I think there has to be a proviso in there that you don't have to do it because of work commitments and things like that. But I think that that it should be considered by the chair or vice chair. I just thought it might be help to fill some gaps, that's all. So.
If I may, Chairman, I think you're exactly right in that ought to be something we refer as a suggestion to Democracy Committee, because this perhaps isn't the forum for discussing what potentially could be a constitutional change. But a couple of observations in the first instance would be, I think the term that you used was sort of, and I know you didn't really mean it as bluntly as it sounded, but sort of the important bodies kind of thing, and there might be some conversation as to which one of those each chair sits on. And I think there's also a discussion around this to be had of, well, actually, it's either part of the job of being a chairperson or it's not. And actually, if you put yourself forward for that role, you either take it on or you don't. Otherwise, it's just another outside body's nomination and it's a pointless change in the first place. But rather than dwell on it here, you're right in saying, and I'm happy to support that goes as a recommendation to Democracy.
Lovely. So is that agreed with everybody? Yep. Okay. Lovely.
And then we're going to re-advertise all the vacancies again. Yeah.
Is that agreed?
Everybody agreed with that one?
Yep. Okay, lovely. Super. I think we're there. You happy, Caroline?
Did you want to put forward that? Yeah.
If I could put some better wording to it, perhaps. So my suggestion was that in the regrettable circumstance where we don't have a member come forward for perhaps a more than a year, that we might politely suggest to that outside body that they maintain contact with their local councillors, but actually don't reserve that position and hold it away from another potential person outside of this system.
There is under on 2.7, the Democracy and General Purposes Committee agreed at their meeting in July that there would be certain criterion set against prolonged vacancies. And that was that vacancies would be just advertised at least once per municipal year. Then if the position remained vacant for more than 2 years, then it was be submitted to the relevant committee for consideration. And the committee must then make a recommendation to full council if it decides it wants to either retain it or lose the vacancy or lose the body.
Then if I may, I think what we're potentially arriving at is that any currently vacant positions, we're potentially looking at putting a motion to full council to ask those bodies to consider holding those vacancies open to people outside of this council as well. Notwithstanding the fact that after that a councillor might just happen to come forward, but that it shouldn't necessarily be reserved for this council.
Thank you. Is everybody agreed? I'll let everybody okay with that.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. Lovely. Okay. Thank you very much. Right, moving on to agenda item 13, Hackney Carriages and Private Hire Licensing Policy. Mr Littlemore, please.
Thank you, Chairman. This really was about tidying up the document and reviewing the policy. The matter has been considered by the licensing committee, as you would have seen, and indeed some of you are members of the licensing committee. There was a formal consultation, and again, that's part of the report attached as Appendix 1. There were no significant comments coming back from the consultation that required the draft policy to be amended. I think there was one of the more contentious issues that have been discussed in recent months with the trade has been around low emission strategy, but that wasn't part of this amended policy, although it appears that the comments were conflated across from the previous consultation on that. This committee has the delegated authority to approve this policy. Some licensing policies are required to be approved by full council by statute, but this isn't one of them. But the way our constitution is written, it's the responsibility of this committee to approve the policy, although the licensing committee has had the opportunity to look at it and comment on it. But there were no comments arising from licensing committee last week that requires me to give you an update. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, members? Councillor Joy.
Question, but open to anyone to ask, but just to agree the recommendation on page 23.
Okay, seconded, Councillor Burton. Anybody want to say a word at all? Councillor Pearl.
I was just sort of interested if it's possible to put the licensing committee chair on the spot, if that's okay. Obviously, in the past, I had the good fortune of sitting on the licensing committee, and every time anything to do with taxis came up on the agenda, we were chock-a-block full of the chaps turning up and lobbying and so forth. Obviously, I feel somewhat sort of bereft that tonight, I haven't had any lobbying, and I didn't know whether did they turn up in force last week, or were they quite happy with how things were?
I'll let Councillor Joy.
Yeah, as chairman of licensing, I will say no. There was a lot of empty chairs. I kind of remember Mrs. Matthews, the previous time, but I endorse everything that Mr. Littlemore said. And if you look at 2.4, it says the areas of biggest concern was around the changes proposed to testing of knowledge and driver standards. And to be honest, there was nothing really that came up at the meeting at all. So I'm quite comfortable that we agree the recommendation.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Okay, we go for the recommendation proposed by Councillor Joy and seconded by Councillor Burton that the amended draft taxi and private hire licensing policy be recommended for adoption by the Communities Housing and Environment Committee. Those for? Those against? That's unanimous. Thank you very much, and that closes the meeting, everybody. Thank you for your time.